Good morning and
What?
welcome to the virtual breakfast session. I'm Larry Sashin, and today we're doing coffee with Drew Nieporent. What a story this man has to tell. We have a couple of questions for him, but first we have to thank the guy who's paying the bills today, Ed Flanagan and Era Group. Listen, you work very, very hard for your money. And if you're not quite sure you're getting what you paid for or would like to rework an agreement with your distributors, call Ed Flanagan, the Era Group. They will sift through your invoices, sift through your contract, and see if they can do better for you. So, Ed Flanagan, Era Group, and back to the show. Coffee with Drew Nieporent. Drew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Drew Nieporent. I've been a restaurateur. Well, I'm 70 now, so pretty much since 1985, I've owned restaurants, opened 40 restaurants in 40 years, wrote a book called I'm Not Trying to Be Difficult, and it's great to be with you this morning.
Okay. After reading your biography, I understand that you're incredibly organized. You have a gift of management. You're incredibly creative. Why the God did you go into food service and hospitality?
That's really the question. Well, I was the beneficiary of two wonderful parents. My mother was an actress in radio, a child actress, very prominent actually in her field. This was before television. My father was 14 years her senior. He worked for the State Liquor Authority, licensing restaurant. My brother and I have an older brother, Tracy. My brother and I grew up in Peter Cooper Village. And my father, because he had a way of taking the application from the bottom of the pile, putting it on the top of the pile, expediting matters for these people who were really, immigrants right off the boat. And their restaurants were so authentic and delicious food and all different ethnic varieties. These people would invite us to their restaurant. And I mean, there were like 100 restaurants. I once wrote it down, all different type, French, very fancy French, Italian, German, coffee shop, delicatessen. So food was front and center in my family. My father never made a lot of money. My mother worked very hard, but also actors and actresses, especially in those days, didn't make any money. But my father took us to all these restaurants. And it's like if you grew up with a piano in your house or your parents exposed you to music, you're going to gravitate to that. I gravitated to food immediately. I wanted to be a chef. And I knew at a very early age, I was very directed that food was my destiny.
Okay. You started Montrachet in 85, I believe I read.
Yeah.
That puts you at the ripe old age of 31.
Right.
I'm sorry to, tell everybody your age, but most of the people that listen can't do math anyway. One, where did you come up with the concept? Number two, this was in the height of all the excitement in 85. Nouvelle cuisine, all the chefs were rising. They weren't stars yet. They were getting there. How did you come up with the concept and get this thing going?
I was actually 29. My brother's older than I was
Okay.
55. So I thought I was old at 29, but obviously 29 is a wonderful year to do something entrepreneurial. It was an ascension. I had very good education, Stuyvesant High School in New York City. And then I went to Cornell Hotel School. Cornell is an Ivy League school. I don't know how I got in, but I did, and worked on all these, the book obviously chronicles my ascension because it really was all of the experiences added up finally. Because when I was at Cornell, my fellow students would say, what are you going to do? And I'd say, well, I'm going to open my own restaurant, but it wasn't happening. I was working in La Grenouille. I had worked at a number of French restaurants like Le Régence, La Réserve, Le Périgord. So working at La Grenouille, I had in mind to do a California-inspired restaurant called the Silverado Trail. California wines, French wines, American food, which was not a thing back then. I'm at La Grenouille and I'm pouring a bottle of Montrachet. Le Montrachet, the most expensive wine in the world. And the bottle was like glowing at me. It was a gold label, but it was a sign from God. And I was like, why am I trying to reinvent the wheel? Everything was French back then. I said, let me do a French restaurant. Montrachet. That's it, Montrachet. So now I had the idea, but I had run the New York Marathon in 1983 and then got on a plane and went to the West Coast and whirlwind trip Bago and Michael's in Santa Monica and all these great California restaurants. The scene was really happening in California back in that year, 82, 83. And then I met this young chef. The last day I was in San Francisco by the name of David Boulay, who was cooking at a restaurant called Utter 500. His food blew me away. Got back to New York, called him up. Would you ever consider doing a restaurant? He would. And what you have to understand is that this man, his food was sensational. He was a huge pain in the butt. And, that plays itself out in the book, obviously. And we had an amazing opportunity because, like what you said, we opened Montrachet. Guess what? We charged for 3 courses, $16. So, wow. And then Brian Miller of the New York Times, the food critic at the time, gave us 3 stars. And we could have filled Chase Stadium. It was unbelievable experience. We couldn't vibe together. We were two very headstrong people. But, of course, he lasted 13 months. That was his total tenure at the restaurant. The restaurant went for 22 years until I converted it to Corton, where I changed the kitchen, the decor. That got 3 stars. Then a few years later, Bâtard in the same location got 3 stars. So all told, in that one location, I had this restaurant for about 38 years, which is pretty amazing. My first restaurant, but which I kept because it was functional and it meant a lot to me. But then this guy, Robert De Niro, you might have heard of him, he showed up at Montrachet one night and proposed doing a second restaurant with no idea of really what he wanted to do. That's when Tribeca Grill was birthed. And that restaurant went for 35 years, which is extraordinary in New York. 35 years, pretty good.
So Drew, hold on one second.
Yes.
So one of the things that I noticed is from Montrachet to Nobu and the many, and I know you don't like the word concepts, iterations, you've always put a real emphasis on food. Everybody seems to be into this service experience, but as I read the book, everything seems to be about getting the food right. Is that still the priority?
I know, yes. I know this is going to sound, a little stupid, but I never once sat down and said, or ran numbers, for instance, and said, if I do this, I'm going to make this much money. I never thought about money. That's number one. Number two, I never concepts, because what I tried to do is fit, because I knew New York very well. I knew the New York restaurant scene, certainly. Tried to figure out what New York needed food-wise. I didn't realize it back then. I realize it now. The chef is the critical component to any restaurant, the personality of the chef, because not everybody cooks well. Not everybody has bedside manners you can get along with. So I approached every restaurant like a movie that had a script. The actors were the chef, obviously the lead actor, and then an ensemble of performers of the front of the house and the back of the house. And then you're doing lighting and you're doing scenery with paintings or whatever kind of decoration. If you hire David Rockwell for the first time or whatever, that's the way I approached restaurant. I might not have been able to articulate that it was always about the food, but that was what it was about. And then, because I had worked in so many restaurants, busy restaurants and successful restaurants, I saw a lot of the way you don't do things. I saw a lot of mistakes. And I thought I would be able to achieve my own Shangri-La. But of course, what you realize is you can't fight City Hall, that problems are going to arise even if you think that you're going to have problem-free oasis of a restaurant. There's always going to be problems. Oh,
one of the things too that's sort of been one of your under-described but really admired is your ability to read the real estate market. Talk a little bit about, when you started at Montrachet and it was, I think you mentioned $50 a square foot, and how 50 is now turned into 200 plus, et cetera.
Right.
What's the approach been to finding the real estate and getting that right?
Well, the first was, if you don't have a pot to piss in, you don't have any money, you can't afford a high rental neighborhood. I went to Cornell. E.M. Statler, his motto was location, location. My motto was, I was jogging once in New York, because I mentioned I ran the New York Marathon. I was jogging and I found this out of the way neighborhood called Tribeca, where actually the first rent that I paid was $12 a foot. I had a landlord who gave me a lease that was 3 pages, and then I got 3 stars in the New York Times. So I was able to bring the bees to the honey. So I thought that would be the modus operandi. I would, build it and they will come. I realize now that if you have a restaurant on 57th Street like Nobu is, and then you can push $30 million a year in gross sale, because location is very important. But my thing with the real estate was very simple. I'm not going to pay a lot of rent. I mean, I was supposed to do a restaurant in Harlem back in the 90s, late 90s. And they said, we want you to pay 7% of gross sales. And I go, I'm going to pay you $5,000 a month, straight rent, $60,000 a year. That's going to be it. And they were ready to make the deal. I never did this restaurant, by the way, but because if my success, let's just say, like a restaurant a normal restaurant would do $5 million, would be very successful. But let's just say I doubled that and I did $10 million. Why am I paying you? I'm in this location. I'm the reason that I'm grossing that kind of number. So percentage rent, the real estate people are so clever. And that's why they're all wealthy, because they have figured out that once they create a level that people say is market rent, then every other schmuck has to pay the same amount. So I refused. Now, I told you I had the first restaurant for 40 years. Guess what? When I sold that restaurant, you know what my rent was? $12,000 a month. Right next door to me, Frenchette paying $34,000. I've been fortunate. That might have been something, when you make money, you shouldn't be afraid to pay rent. Now I see real estate people are the ones that are leasing to Daniel Boulud and to Jean-Georges Vongerichten, because they'll build a restaurant for you for X number of dollars, some ridiculous amount, but they'll get it back eventually with the way they create these deals.
Royalty versus flat rent.
Flat rent. I never paid a percentage rent until Nobu. What do you call it? First Nobu was flat rent, but then they tried to increase our rent, every let's just say 10 years, but we were there 22 years. When we make the deal with Richard Lefrak on 57th Street, he gave us a huge amount of TI money. We did make a percentage rent deal, which, by the way, has worked out for him and worked out for us. That's why we've been there for, I guess it's going to be close to 20 years now. When we did the deal downtown after we moved, the first time we moved about 5 years ago, it might be a little more than 5 years ago, but we made the same deal, which didn't make any sense. I didn't make that deal, by the way. Didn't make any sense because downtown, location-wise, was not as good as 57th Street. But we made the same deal. And of course, downtown we do fabulously well, but we don't grow same number that we gross uptown.
So you mentioned the word deal a couple times, and when we think of the word deal today, we think of one human being on the planet. In the book, you have a story about that particular gentleman.
Yes.
Want to tell that story, please?
What I would tell you is this. I get a phone call. There's a group of people, and they said, listen, Philip Johnson, who's a renowned architect, Philip Johnson, has been dealing with your ex-chef, David Boulay. He doesn't show up for meetings on time. He's late, whatever. Can you take a meeting with him? I said, yeah, of course. I'll take a meeting with Philip Johnson. I meet Philip Johnson, proceeds to show me these renderings that were horrific. They were like small cave-like structure with small porthole windows. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And he said, so what do you think? And I go, well, I would think you'd want to bring the outdoor indoor, because we were right opposite Central Park. And he looked at me and he gave me this rug like, well, maybe you're right. And let's start working. And the next day they called me up. They said, Philip Johnson loved you. He wants to work with you in the worst way. There's just one problem. You're going to have to meet our partner, Donald Trump. This is 1997. And now listen to me. He owns 5%. We own the rest. But when you talk to him, he's going to act like he owns the whole thing. Just let it go in one ear and out the other. Does it sound familiar to you, Fred?
Yeah.
I meet with him. He does. The second I step in the room, hey, Drew, Drew, you're a downtown guy. This is uptown. You got to give me your best deal. Everybody wants this place. This guy wants it. That guy wants it. And I'm thinking, I got this in the bag. They've already told me they love me, blah, blah, blah. He owns 5%. Hey, have you ever been to Mar-a-Lago? You want to go to Mar-a-Lago? He invites me to Mar-a-Lago. I went to Mar-a-Lago, Fred. I went to Mar-a-Lago. This is 97. And anyway, I was on a charity event in Hawaii. My mother called me up. She said, I'm reading New York Magazine. It said, Jean-Georges Vongerichten is going to be in the Trump Tower on the west side. You said that was your deal. So I was like, what? So I call Phil Suarez, was John George's business partner. He goes, Drew, I offered Trump $100,000. That's it. He took the deal, boom, When he's running for president the first time, I'm thinking like the leopard doesn't change its spots, and what we're going through obviously now is not only a unique time, it's going to be interesting what happens, because every day there's something. But my small little interaction is indicative of what was to come.
You've worked with a lot of celebrities. You've hosted a lot of celebrities. You also have a wonderful story about Princess Diana.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, because first of all, the whole Nobu thing, I believe that Nobu is the most important food event of the last 30 years. There's no question. There's 56 Nobus now around the world. The influence of Nobu, food-wise, seen in, even Italian restaurants with the crudos and, and I'm not saying that Mexican restaurants with aguachiles or ceviches, but Nobu, the popularity of Nobu popularized raw fish, which Americans would not eat raw fish. That was just not going to happen. So sushi and sashimi, as the basic staple. We had this opportunity after New York. In 1994, we opened New York. We had an opportunity to go to London. And in the book, you'll see where Nobu pretty much didn't want to do anything. And in fact, actually made a decision to do another restaurant, not ours. But that's the stunning point of life. Life is a series of forks in the road, and sometimes you take the right one, sometimes you don't have a choice. But we had this opportunity to go to London. He had initially said no. The owner, our partner in London, sent him a Concorde ticket. The rest is history. So now we're in London. Owner's wife, Miss Zhang, she says, I'm going to have lunch. I want to have lunch with Princess Diana. And we go, well, we're not open for lunch. And she goes, well, you're going to be open that day. Princess Diana came in, and everything you see about Princess Diana, the way her expressions and how quiet she was, but I have a very clear memory of that luncheon. She wanted to eat. She wanted to eat in the worst way, but at Nobu, you share the food. It's not individual, and I'm not quite certain what she ate or what we served. But Mrs. Ong, O-N-G, is Christine Ong, is the wife of B.S. Ong. She really wasn't eating, so I do remember Princess Diana wanting to eat, but sort of waiting to see if Mrs. Ong was eating. Anyway, at the end, there were no cell phones back then. Couldn't take pictures, but I remember running to the window as she's leaving and trying to, with some Polaroid, trying to take a photograph of Princess Diana, which obviously never came out. But that was
And then you also had your lifetime hero Muhammad Ali walk in.
Well, that was
Talk about that.
Yeah, because Ali, Ali was probably the greatest influence on my life. But of course, he was an influence on many people's lives because he was just so brilliant. He was articulate, and he backed it up. He was the champ, but he backed things up. But one night they called me and they said, "Oh, Muhammad Ali is in the restaurant." So I race over there. And he's there with Howard Bingham, who was a photographer friend of his, very close friend. But Ali's in the early moments of Parkinson's. And so Howard goes, "Champ, this is Drew Nieporent. He's the owner." And, Ali shakes it, puts his hand, his hand is shaking, and he sits down and he takes a napkin, he unfurls the napkin, pulls out a Sharpie, and he starts Googling a little bit. After about 5 minutes, I'm looking at Howard. It's kind of embarrassing. He's just doodling on a napkin. He switches to the left side of the napkin. He's doodling on the left side of the napkin. Well, he sat there for a half an hour, drew 2 mountain ranges, a boat with a plume of smoke coming through, signed it Muhammad Ali, and handed me the napkin, which I proudly have in my house, framed. Extraordinary. I have an original Muhammad Ali painting.
Love it.
Oh, man. So listen.
Yes.
Obviously, you've had a good grasp on what's happening next.
Yes.
Where do you see the food industry as a whole going? What do you see happening, and what changes need to be made?
Well, for the longest time, I was down on technology. We still have those horrible ovens that break every 3 seconds. Yeah, just equipment that you use in a restaurant is very, very arcane. Now there are these new speed ovens, convection type ovens. Things are improving, microwave type things. We didn't discuss it, but for the last 12 years, I make the hamburgers at Madison Square Garden, and they're a tremendous hamburger. And the reason they're tremendous is when I worked at McDonald's when I was 17, I was in high school working at McDonald's. I enjoyed working at McDonald's immensely. They had a very good system. But the worst thing was the frozen meat and the cooking of the hamburgers, because they frozen meat steams on a flat top, and it's just disgusting. Madison Square Garden, I've been part of their charity Garden of Dreams for many years. They called me up. They said, "We're spending $1 billion. We're going to transform the food service as well. Do you want a concession?" I go, "Yes." "What do you want to do?" "I'm going to do a chicken Parmesan sandwich." They call me 2 days later and they say, "You got the hamburger." I go, "I don't want the hamburger." Shake Shack had just opened, for instance. The hamburger at Madison Square Garden was horrible. I said, "Well, that's all that's left. If you don't do the hamburger, you don't do anything." So I thought about it. I said, "Okay, I'll do the hamburger." So the bun, I knew what I was going to use. The meat was Pat LaFreda, the condiments we could make. But one thing was cooking the meat. How am I going to cook the meat? I'm not cooking it like McDonald's. And I found a conveyor belt that cooks 18 hamburgers in 4 minutes, beautifully medium rare because it grills up and down. Toast the buns on the bottom. I do 2,000 hamburgers for a Knicks and a Ranger game, maybe for Billy Joel, I'm not sure. The hamburger is succulent. It's wrapped in a beautiful wrapper. It stays hot. Nobody waits. And they've blown through, John George von Gerichten, Andrew Carmelini, all these people. But my hamburger, because of a simple technology of conveyor belt, Japanese model, worked. Food service, you need the equipment to do the volume to make money. That's important. So what I would tell you is I hope technology is going to improve. That's number one. You go to some of these places and chopped salad. Is that a new concept? Sandwiches. Joe Bastianich has imported that sandwich from Italy, and now it's in New York and other places. And what's the big deal? Well, they serve it on focaccia with the pistachio cream. You're never going to reinvent the wheel, but there's a great idea staring you right in the face. And it could be a hamburger, but it's a different way of cooking the hamburger, different way of holding the hamburger, a different way of garnishing the hamburger that sets you apart from the other hamburger.
Okay. Fred, last question.
Yeah, and it has to be this. You may have retired from some of your restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
but you've still got more creative ideas than you had 35 years ago. What's the next chapter?
I joke about this because, look, I lived such a wonderful life and so many great stories that's the reason I wrote the book. That's number one. What's next is, as I look out, and I see the line down the block every day at Katz's Delicatessen. Katz's, you might know those people. I realize a pastrami sandwich is now $30. That's an entree. I mean, in fine restaurants, $30, now they're charging $40, but $30 is a lot of money. So you can now make money in a deli. I'm Jewish. I would love to do a deli with unbelievable, because the rye bread at Katz's it's not great. And the whole system there. And that's, I used to joke, I used to say, I'd like to do a Chinese restaurant, but that's not in my blood anymore. But a Jewish deli, I need a money partner, a strategic partner.
Okay. Well, thank you. As usual, time is our enemy. It's got to be.
Larry, one more time. Just the name of the book, Drew, and where can you get it?
So my book is called I'm Not Trying to Be Difficult. You can buy it on Amazon online. A lot of people are doing that, obviously. But I was just in the Strand bookstore, and I asked them, do they have the book? Because, of course, I thought it was going to be a bestseller, which apparently it's selling very well. It won't be a New York Times bestseller. But they had it in the New York section, which I just don't understand. But you can find it in most places. In fact, Kitchen Arson Letters, I was there the other day, and they had it very prominently displayed. So it's a great book. I hope everybody gets an opportunity to buy it.
Thank you. Back to what we're talking about here. So before we go back to Drew for that one little thing, which I will frame for him at the time, we have to thank the guy who's paying the bill today, Ed Flanagan and the Era Group. Listen, I say it over again, and maybe it'll start to sink in. It's not what you make, it's what you keep. And if you want to keep those dollars you work so hard for, call the Era Group and Ed Flanagan and have their people sift through your invoices and contracts to make sure your dollar is buying you the most it can. Drew, before we say goodbye, you've made a lot of right moves. Every move you make, there's got to be one constant, that one rule of thumb that makes or breaks a deal for you. What would that be?
Well, this is cliche, but it's just hard work and sticking with it. For instance, like if you believe in what you do, it might not hit immediately. I mean, everyone is not going to get 3 stars in their first restaurant. But if you work hard every single day, try to learn something, whether it's about people or it's about your craft, food, that's the right formula.
Okay. Sounds simple.
It is.
Why isn't everybody doing it?
That's the way life is.
Yes. Well, like I said, time is our enemy. Fred, you have any last comments?
Nope. Thank you very much. Amazing story. So glad
Thanks
we could share it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right. I'll catch
Drew,
up.
this has been an education for me, as it always is, but yours hits home in very many ways.
Thank you.
So listen, we'll be back again next week. And until then, I only have 2 things to say. Everybody, stay positive, test negative, and I'll see you next week.